Think about the last leader you believed in, the one who promised change, who spoke with absolute certainty, who made you feel like they understood your anger, your frustration, your need for something different. Now think about what happened after. Did they deliver? Or did you watch them transform into exactly what they replaced? Did you feel betrayed, used, like you'd seen this movie before but couldn't stop yourself from buying another ticket? Here's the uncomfortable part. You're going to do it again. Not because you're stupid, not because you don't learn, but because 500 years ago, a disgraced Italian diplomat figured out something about human nature that we still can't accept. Something so dark, so precise, that his name became an insult. Something that explains why history keeps repeating itself while we pretend each time is different. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli, and he wrote the playbook that every manipulative leader still uses today. Let me show you how this actually plays out. A leader emerges during chaos, economic collapse, social division, national crisis. People are scared, angry, desperate for someone who seems to have answers. Then comes someone with absolute confidence. They don't speak in careful political language. They speak in certainties. They name enemies. They promise restoration. They make complex problems sound simple, and you believe them. Machiavelli explained why in The Prince. He wrote that leaders must understand this core truth. People don't want reality. They want the feeling of certainty. They don't want nuanced policy discussions. They want someone who makes them feel powerful. They don't want to hear about their own role in society's problems. They want external enemies to blame. This is the first move in the playbook. Create the illusion of absolute confidence while the world feels unstable. Narcissistic leaders, the kind Machiavelli would recognize instantly, know how to weaponize this. Studies show that people with narcissistic traits are drawn to political power at rates 5 times higher than the average population. And they're good at getting it. Not because they're more qualified. Research proves they're not. But because they excel at one specific thing, making you believe in them during the moment you're most vulnerable. Think about every populist leader in history. Every authoritarian who rose to power through democratic means. Every CEO who destroyed a company while enriching themselves. They all used variations of the same opening move, and it works because it's tapping into something deep in human psychology that we can't easily override. You feel the certainty. You mistake it for competence. You vote for confidence over character. Machiavelli saw this pattern in Renaissance Italy, where city-states rose and fell based on which leader could manipulate public perception most effectively. He watched Cesare Borgia, his model for the perfect prince, use charm and brutality in calculated doses. Borgia would publicly perform mercy while privately arranging disappearances. He'd promise protection while engineering the very threats people feared, and the people loved him until they didn't. Machiavelli broke down the mechanics of political control into specific, repeatable tactics. These aren't theories. They're patterns observed across centuries, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Let me show you the 5 core tactics that narcissistic leaders still deploy exactly as Machiavelli described. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." This is about the gap between image and truth. Modern psychological research calls this impression management. Machiavelli called it survival. He explained that effective leaders must cultivate an appearance of virtue, honesty, and integrity, even when operating from entirely different principles. Look at how this works in practice. A leader presents themselves as anti-establishment while surrounded by billionaires. They claim to drain the swamp while filling positions with industry insiders. They speak about protecting workers while implementing policies that benefit corporations. The appearance contradicts the reality, but the appearance is what gets broadcast, repeated, memed, and believed. Studies on narcissistic leadership show these individuals possess a specific skill. They're exceptionally good at managing how others perceive them in short bursts. Job interviews, campaign rallies, press conferences, moments where charisma matters more than track record. They shine in these environments because they've mastered the performance of leadership without necessarily developing the substance. Machiavelli understood that perception management isn't a side skill for leaders. It's the primary skill, because in politics, what people believe about you matters infinitely more than what's actually true about you. The truth takes time to emerge. The image works immediately, and by the time the truth catches up, they've already won. Machiavelli observed that nothing unites people behind a leader faster than a common enemy. He advised princes to always identify threats, even when those threats needed to be manufactured or exaggerated, because fear focused outward prevents scrutiny focused inward. This tactic shows up everywhere once you're looking for it. A leader identifies an external enemy. Immigrants, elites, the media, foreign powers, political opponents, minority groups. They don't just criticize these targets. They frame them as existential threats. They use language that escalates emotional response. They create the sense that if you're not fighting against these enemies, you're complicit with them. Research on authoritarian leadership patterns confirms what Machiavelli knew intuitively. Narcissistic leaders increase political polarization deliberately. They fuel hostility. They dehumanize opponents. They intensify social divisions because divided populations are easier to control. When people are angry at each other, they're not examining the leader's record. When they're fighting culture wars, they're not noticing policy failures. Machiavelli even gave specific advice on this. He wrote that a prince should make sure any cruelty serves a clear purpose and happens quickly, so it can be forgotten. But benefits should be distributed slowly so they can be savored. In modern terms, create the crisis fast, claim credit for solving it slowly, blame enemies immediately, take responsibility never. The pattern repeats across centuries because it exploits something fundamental in group psychology. Humans are tribal. We form in-groups and out-groups naturally. Skilled manipulators simply hijack this tendency and amplify it for political gain. They don't create the division from nothing. They find existing fault lines and then pour gasoline on them. You see it happening. You might even recognize it as manipulation. But when the leader identifies enemies that you also genuinely distrust, the tactic still works because they're validating feelings you already had. That's the genius of the approach. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like someone finally telling the truth. Here's where Machiavelli gets truly dark. He explained that princes must inspire loyalty through a careful balance of fear and affection. But the loyalty must always flow one direction, toward the leader. The leader owes nothing in return. He wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But he also noted that the most effective leaders make people believe they're loved, even as fear does the real work. This creates a psychological trap. Followers become invested in proving their loyalty to someone who views them as disposable. Look at how this manifests in modern leadership. Narcissistic leaders surround themselves with people willing to compromise their integrity for access to power. They demand public displays of loyalty. They test followers by asking them to defend obvious lies. They create an environment where criticism equals betrayal, and questioning becomes enemy action. Studies show that once narcissistic leaders consolidate power, they systematically remove anyone who challenges them. They fire truth-tellers. They sideline independent thinkers. They promote yes people who prioritize personal advancement over organizational health. This isn't paranoia. It's strategy. Because Machiavelli understood that the greatest threat to a manipulative leader is someone in their inner circle who might tell the truth. The loyalty trap works through a psychological phenomenon called escalation of commitment. Once people have publicly defended a leader, contradicted their own previous positions, or sacrificed relationships to maintain their allegiance, they become psychologically invested. Admitting they were wrong means admitting they sacrificed for nothing. So they defend harder. They rationalize more aggressively. They attack critics more viciously. The leader doesn't need to be worthy of this loyalty. They just need to set up the conditions where abandoning loyalty feels more costly than maintaining it. That's pure Machiavelli, and it's everywhere. Machiavelli lived before mass media, but he understood information control. He advised princes to carefully manage what people believed about events, even when contradicting observable reality, because the story that spreads matters more than what actually happened. In our current era, this tactic has evolved into something more sophisticated and more dangerous. Leaders don't just spin stories, they undermine the concept of truth itself. They label unfavorable facts as fake news. They discredit institutions designed to provide accountability. They create alternative narratives that appeal to emotion while ignoring evidence. Research on Machiavellian leadership tactics shows that strategic manipulation and deceitfulness are core traits. Modern narcissistic politicians have mastered what Machiavelli could only dream of: the ability to broadcast their version of reality directly to millions of people, bypassing traditional gatekeepers entirely. Social media gives them this power, and they use it exactly as Machiavelli would have predicted. They tweet lies faster than fact-checkers can respond. They dominate news cycles through controversy. They keep opponents constantly defending against accusations instead of promoting alternatives. They use the attention economy exactly as Machiavelli understood the political economy. Whoever controls the conversation controls the perception. Whoever controls the perception controls reality. Machiavelli wrote that princes should never reveal their true reasoning for decisions unless that revelation serves a purpose. Modern translation: keep people guessing, create confusion, make it impossible to pin down what you actually believe or intend. Because when people can't figure out your real position, they can't effectively oppose you. This is why pathological lying has become a feature, not a bug, of modern leadership. It's not that these leaders are bad at lying. It's that constant lying serves a strategic purpose. It exhausts opposition. It makes truth-seeking feel pointless. It trains people to give up on expecting honesty and instead focus on tribal loyalty. And Machiavelli would look at our current information landscape and smile, because he told us this is exactly how power works when morality becomes optional. The final tactic Machiavelli emphasized might be the most important. Leaders must always appear strong, especially when they're weak. Showing vulnerability is political death. Admitting error is defeat. Apologizing is surrender. He advised princes to study military strategy constantly, even in peacetime, because the image of martial strength deters challenges. Modern politicians learned this lesson. They stage photo ops at military bases. They use aggressive language. They frame political disagreements as battles to be won rather than problems to be solved. They perform dominance constantly, because Machiavelli was right. People feel safer following someone who projects absolute confidence, even when that confidence is entirely unearned. Psychological research on narcissistic leaders confirms they share specific traits: overconfidence, impulsiveness, need for admiration, and willingness to exploit others. These aren't character flaws to them. They're tools. Because in a world where perceived strength matters more than actual competence, these traits become advantages. Think about how leadership debates are judged. Who won? Who dominated? Who seemed more presidential? Notice the language. It's all performance-based. Not who had better policy. Not who told more truth. Who performed strength more convincingly. Machiavelli understood that actual leadership ability is invisible to most observers. But the appearance of strength is immediately obvious to everyone. This creates a terrible filter for leadership selection. We elevate the people who are best at performing confidence, regardless of whether that confidence has any basis in competence. And narcissistic individuals are exceptional performers because they genuinely believe in their own superiority. They're not faking confidence. They actually think they're better than everyone else. That authentic belief in their own exceptionalism reads as genuine strength. So we end up selecting leaders based on their ability to project certainty during uncertainty, dominance during chaos, and strength during weakness. Exactly the traits Machiavelli said effective princes must possess. And exactly the traits that psychological research now tells us predict poor leadership outcomes, unethical behavior, and organizational destruction. The filter is broken. But we can't seem to fix it, because Machiavelli was describing something deeper than bad leaders. He was describing what we want from leaders, even when what we want leads to our own exploitation. Now here's where this gets really dark. You might think you're immune to these tactics because you understand them. You're aware of manipulation. You can spot narcissistic behavior. You've read this far, so clearly you're thinking critically about leadership patterns. That should protect you, right? Machiavelli has bad news for you. Knowing the game doesn't exempt you from playing it. In fact, awareness sometimes makes you more vulnerable, not less. Because sophisticated manipulation doesn't require you to be unaware. It requires you to have emotional needs that override your logical understanding. Studies show that narcissistic leaders often rise to power during times of uncertainty, specifically because people are looking for someone who projects absolute confidence. Even when you know that confidence might be unearned, even when you suspect the certainty is performance, the emotional relief of believing in someone strong enough to fix everything is incredibly appealing. Especially when you're scared. Especially when existing institutions seem to be failing. Machiavelli observed this in his own time. He watched educated, sophisticated citizens of Florence make terrible leadership choices repeatedly, not because they were ignorant, but because they were desperate. He watched people elevate manipulative leaders while simultaneously knowing they were being manipulated. Because the alternative felt worse. The alternative was accepting that complex problems don't have simple solutions, that no single leader can fix systemic issues, and that meaningful change requires collective effort over long periods of time. That's an exhausting reality to accept. So instead, we fall for the same patterns. We find a new leader who seems different this time. We believe their promises even though history suggests we shouldn't. We excuse their behavior patterns because they're on our side. We rationalize red flags because admitting we made another mistake feels unbearable. And the cycle continues. Research on the dark triad personality traits, narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism shows that individuals possessing these characteristics are drawn to political power at much higher rates than the general population. Not sometimes, consistently. Across cultures, across time periods, across political systems. The people most willing to manipulate, deceive, and exploit others for personal gain are the same people most motivated to seek positions where they can do exactly that. Democracy was supposed to prevent this. Checks and balances were designed to constrain dangerous leaders. Media was supposed to expose their lies. Education was supposed to make us too smart to fall for obvious manipulation. But Machiavelli predicted all of these safeguards would fail if the underlying human psychology remained unchanged. And he was right. Because 500 years of technological progress, institutional development, and educational advancement haven't changed the fundamental dynamics he identified. We are still tribal. We're still vulnerable to confident deception. We're still willing to trade freedom for the feeling of security. We're still human. And being human means being exploitable. Let me show you the structural reasons why Machiavelli's observations remain eternally relevant, even when we desperately wish they weren't. The first reason is what psychologists call system justification. Humans have a powerful psychological need to believe the systems they're part of are legitimate and fair. This creates cognitive blindness. When a leader within our preferred political system displays narcissistic or manipulative behavior, we unconsciously downplay or rationalize it because fully recognizing it would mean acknowledging problems with the system we've invested our identity in. Machiavelli saw this clearly. He noted that people will continue supporting a corrupt prince as long as they can maintain the illusion that their support is justified. They'll interpret obvious exploitation as tough leadership. They'll frame clear self-interest as strategic thinking. They'll convince themselves that their leader's cruelty is necessary strength, because the alternative means admitting they empowered someone terrible. The second structural reason is how political competition actually works. Machiavellian tactics succeed because they exploit asymmetries in political conflict. Ethical leaders constrain themselves with rules that manipulative leaders ignore. Truth-tellers operate with handicaps that liars don't face. People committed to democratic norms limit their own power in ways that authoritarians never would. This creates an evolutionary pressure in political systems. The leaders willing to use the most ruthless tactics have competitive advantages over those who won't. Not always, not in every situation, but often enough that over time, political systems tend to select for increasingly Machiavellian leadership unless something actively prevents that selection. Machiavelli wasn't celebrating this dynamic, he was documenting it. His book was written as a warning disguised as advice. He was saying, this is how power actually works, beneath all the noble rhetoric. If you want to survive in political systems, you need to understand these mechanics. And if you want to build better systems, you need to design them with these dark realities in mind, not with naive assumptions about human virtue. The third structural reason is media incentives. Narcissistic leaders are inherently more interesting to cover than competent administrators. They generate drama. They provide controversy. They deliver sound bites. They drive engagement. Modern media systems, especially social media, are optimization engines for attention. And attention disproportionately rewards exactly the personality types Machiavelli described. A leader who speaks in careful, nuanced language about complex policy trade-offs doesn't trend. A leader who makes wild accusations or outrageous promises goes viral. Media outlets face economic pressure to cover the spectacle. Social media algorithms amplify the controversial. The information environment itself has become a selection mechanism favoring Machiavellian leadership traits. Research confirms this. Studies show that politicians with higher levels of narcissism receive more media coverage, not because they're more newsworthy in terms of policy substance, but because their personality generates more engagement. They're better at the performance of politics than the substance of governance. And in a media-saturated environment, performance is what gets rewarded. Machiavelli didn't have Twitter, but he understood that leaders who could dominate public attention had massive advantages over leaders who couldn't. He'd look at our current media landscape and recognize it immediately as an environment perfectly designed to elevate exactly the people who shouldn't have power. The fourth structural reason is our terrible system for filtering leadership candidates. We select leaders through processes that reward confidence, charisma, fundraising ability, and performance under pressure. Notice what's missing from that list: actual governance skills, ethical behavior, long-term thinking, empathy, competence at managing complex systems. The filter selects for exactly the traits that psychological research tells us predict poor leadership outcomes. We've built a system that elevates narcissists by accident, and then act surprised when they behave exactly as narcissists behave. We reward aggressive self-promotion and then complain about leaders who are self-absorbed. We create incentives for Machiavellian behavior and then express shock when leaders follow Machiavellian playbooks. This isn't conspiracy. It's structure. The system works exactly as it's designed to work, and the design produces predictable outcomes. Machiavelli spent his career studying why good intentions produce terrible results in political systems. His answer was brutal, because the system rewards behavior patterns that undermine the outcomes everyone claims to want. We say we want honest, ethical, competent leaders, but we've built selection mechanisms that filter those people out and elevate their opposites. And then we repeat this pattern across generations, while pretending each time is somehow different. Here's the part where I'm supposed to give you hope, tell you there's a way out. Promise that if you just follow these 5 steps, you can protect yourself from manipulative leaders forever. But I'm not going to do that, because Machiavelli wouldn't. And lying to you about solutions would be doing exactly what this video is warning against. The truth is darker and more complicated. There's no simple fix, no life hack that makes you immune to manipulation, no political system that automatically filters out narcissistic leaders. These patterns persist because they're rooted in deep human psychology interacting with power dynamics that emerge in any hierarchical system. But there are things you can do that make you less vulnerable, not invulnerable, just harder to exploit. And if enough people become harder to exploit, the tactics lose some of their effectiveness. Not all of it, but some. And maybe that's enough. First, stop waiting for perfect leaders. They don't exist. You're not choosing between good and evil. You're choosing between different mixtures of competence, ambition, integrity, and self-interest. Machiavelli understood that leadership requires moral compromise. The question isn't whether a leader is pure, it's whether their particular mixture of qualities serves the public interest more than their self-interest. Look for leaders who show capacity for self-correction, who change their minds when presented with evidence, who acknowledge mistakes, who promote people more competent than themselves. These behaviors signal something critically important. They're not narcissists. Because narcissists can't do any of those things. Their psychology won't allow it. Second, develop your own immunity to the certainty drug. When a leader promises simple solutions to complex problems, treat that as a massive red flag, not a selling point. When someone speaks with absolute confidence about everything, recognize that as performance, not knowledge. Real expertise comes with uncertainty. Actual understanding includes nuance. Competent leaders admit what they don't know. Machiavelli observed that the most dangerous princes were those who believed their own propaganda. Modern psychological research confirms this. Narcissistic leaders often genuinely believe in their own superiority, which makes them terrible decision-makers because they can't update their beliefs when reality contradicts them. Your job is to resist the emotional appeal of certainty. To recognize that feeling confused in the face of complexity is often the appropriate response. To value leaders who make you think, rather than leaders who make you feel powerful. Third, understand that voting isn't marriage. You're not looking for a leader you love. You're hiring someone for a job. Would you hire an employee who constantly lied about their qualifications? Would you promote someone who demanded personal loyalty over institutional loyalty? Would you trust someone who never admits mistakes with increasing responsibility? Apply the same standards to political leaders that you'd apply to anyone you were giving power over your life, because that's exactly what you're doing. Machiavelli wrote The Prince partially as satire, showing how absurd leadership selection had become. We're still doing the same absurd things, just with better technology. Fourth, build systems that constrain leaders rather than hoping leaders will constrain themselves. Machiavelli's core lesson was that power corrupts systematically, not accidentally. Expecting leaders to voluntarily limit their power is naive. Better to create structures that force accountability, whether leaders want it or not. This means supporting boring institutional reforms, independent oversight, transparent processes, term limits, whistleblower protections, systems that make corruption harder and truth-telling safer. These aren't sexy political issues. They don't generate passionate movements, but they're what actually matters. Because Machiavelli showed that without structural constraints, even well-intentioned leaders become corrupted by power's internal logic. Fifth, recognize manipulation in real time and call it out, even when it's your side doing it. This is the hardest one, because tribal loyalty is powerful, and admitting that someone you voted for is displaying narcissistic or Machiavellian traits feels like betraying your team. But that feeling is exactly how the system perpetuates. Leaders exploit tribal loyalty by making you believe that criticizing them empowers your enemies. They frame accountability as disloyalty. They make you feel like questioning them is the same as supporting the opposition. Break that pattern. Hold your own side to standards. Machiavelli observed that the surest way for a republic to fall is when citizens become more loyal to leaders than to principles. When party matters more than policy. When winning matters more than how you win. You won't be popular for this. You'll be attacked by your own side for insufficient loyalty. You'll be accused of helping the enemy. But someone has to be willing to say, this behavior is wrong regardless of who's doing it. These tactics are manipulative, whether or not I voted for the person using them. This pattern is dangerous even when it's working in my favor right now. That kind of consistency is rare. It's difficult. It comes with social costs, but it's also the only thing that actually works to break the cycle Machiavelli documented, because these patterns persist when everyone excuses manipulation that benefits them, while condemning identical manipulation that benefits their opponents. So what do you do with this information? You could become cynical, decide that all leaders are corrupt, and political engagement is pointless. That's one response. Machiavelli would understand it. He saw that cynicism everywhere in his time, and it made the manipulation easier, not harder, because checked-out citizens don't hold anyone accountable. Or you could become vigilant. Recognize that manipulation is the default state of political systems, not an aberration. Understand that every leader you ever encounter will display at least some of these patterns. Your job isn't to find the perfect leader who displays none of them. Your job is to identify which leaders use these tactics in service of something beyond themselves, versus which ones use them purely for self-aggrandizement. That's a subtle distinction. It requires ongoing assessment, not one-time judgment. It means accepting that you'll make mistakes, support people you shouldn't, oppose people you should have listened to, miss red flags, fall for manipulation despite your best efforts. But you keep trying anyway, because the alternative is surrender. And surrendering to these patterns means guaranteeing they'll continue. Machiavelli wrote The Prince knowing it would make him hated, knowing people would misunderstand it, misuse it, attack him for it. He wrote it anyway because he believed understanding dark truths was better than living in comfortable ignorance, even when that understanding doesn't provide easy solutions. This video won't make you immune to manipulation, but it might make you more expensive to manipulate. Harder to fool, slower to trust, quicker to question, more willing to hold leaders accountable regardless of whether they're on your team. And if enough people become slightly harder to manipulate, maybe that changes the calculations. Maybe leaders start needing to deliver actual results instead of just performing strength. Maybe institutions start selecting for competence instead of charisma. Maybe. Machiavelli wouldn't promise that, but he'd say it's worth trying, because the pattern will repeat whether you resist it or not. The narcissists will keep rising to power. The manipulation will keep working. The cycle will keep turning. The only variable that might change is you. How long will you keep falling for the same kind of leaders? That's the question Machiavelli asked 500 years ago, and you still need to answer it. Not for him, for yourself, because the next one is coming. The next crisis, the next candidate promising certainty, the next leader performing strength while wielding manipulation. And you'll have to decide if this time will be different. Will it?